Our next session will contemplate the ways in which we have internalized that science imagination, this imagination that we just got quite a bit about. Rationality that was at the heart of much of Enlightenment and then modernity's promises, particularly in science, as we just saw, is at the core of our next session. Some of the artists we will see are the first generation to grow up with science fiction and rationalism embedded in their social and intellectual fabric. For example, Isaac Asimov, a hard science fiction writer known for coining the word robotics, said, in quotes, "True science fiction could not really exist until people understood the rationalism of science and began to use it with respect to their stories," end quote. Science fiction could only exist as a genre when science and technology had become normalized. Once it was rational to think that science could control climate, could expedite work, etc., then we could imagine what was beyond that, what might fall into the category of the irrational or fantastical or fictional. That desire to see what lay beyond what was classified as rational and rationalism had a particular history within South Asia. The rational was always posited in opposition to the magic, ritual, religion. And so if we consider some of the earliest examples of science fiction from Bengal, we have stories such as Jagadnanda Roy's Shukra Brahma, or Travels to Venus, published in 1879, in which he describes alien life forms. We also have an 1896 piece by Jagadish Chandra Bose, who wrote Niruddesha Kahani, one of my favorites, in fact, in which a cyclone was averted by the use of a bottle of hair oil. In each case, there is a negotiation between the rational, the religious, and the impossibly possible. These texts were followed by the work by H.G. Wells, whether we think of Wells' 1898 work of The War of the Worlds, in which we encounter aliens from Mars, or another one of my favorites, his 1902 Discovery of the Future. Again, these emerge at the height of the first industrial revolution, with science and technology being the answer to the specter of scarcity that haunted Western societies for centuries. For many, it was not just about economics, but rather these senses and emancipatory imaginations also had socio-political implications in the world. But somewhere in those rationalisms, imagination also allowed for a certain enchantment to maintain itself. And this brings us to The Future Was Enchanted, Part 2. The first part of this session was held in London in January as a part of our GAF preview at the ICA. There, Nada Raza and I had a conversation about her then upcoming show at the Dhaka Art Summit, The Missing One. Today, we have invited Nada to present on her curatorial project and assist our maneuvering through the convergence of futurisms, sci-fi, dystopia, alienation, and enchantment via works of art made between 1922 and the present. Nada Raza is assistant curator for the South Asia Tate Modern in London. She was a guest curator for the Abraj Group Art Prize in 2014 and has worked with Innova, Green Cardamom, and projects in the UAE and Pakistan. Please join me in welcoming Nada Raza.
Thank you. Is this okay? Before we begin, sorry, could we just start from the beginning? I just wanted to thank the Dhaka Art Summit for inviting me to make this exhibition, and Uzma, Shumon, and Amal for giving the exhibition an afterlife. Niruddesha Kahani, or The Story of the Missing One, was written in 1896 by Jagadish Chandra Bose, and is thought to be one of the first tales of science fiction in Bangla. A research scientist, Bose pioneered wireless communication, and a crater on the moon was named after him. Our tale is based on the disappearance of a cyclone. The protagonist takes credit for this miracle, claiming to have quelled a storm by pouring a bottle of hair oil off a ship deck. To add a prosaic twist, the story was the winning submission to a competition run by the Kuntalin Hair Oil Company. Bose was close to the Tagore family. Gaganendranath Tagore painted a portrait of him that now hangs at the Bose Institute in Calcutta. The turn of the 19th century was a period of furious engagement with scientific progress and modernity, and coincided with the Bengal Renaissance. Its influence sparked radical ideas and encouraged rationalist approaches to religion and culture, even as the idea of freedom and independence took hold. It would have been against this backdrop that the artist painted Resurrection around the early 1920s. It is an ethereal painting with a circular vortex of clouds, rays of light circulating around a central formation, as if we are staring up at the heavens. There's an enigma at the center of this futuristic work, a religious icon. A cross is visible within an arch, and a saintly figure reflects the light. Confronting us from almost a century ago, this picture presents progress and faith in harmony. At the back of the painting is inscribed, "I am with you always, even until the end of the world," a quote from the Gospel of Matthew. We time travel 100 or so years to the turn of the millennium, to the present, keeping to the themes of science and spirituality central to our genre. The exhibition moves through three broad movements, united by the metaphor of looking up at the sky. The first is enchantment, the second, alienation, the last, dystopia and the possibility of redemption. It follows the plot of a science fiction novel or a film. A happy, innocent world, the hostile appearance of a foreign or extraterrestrial being, and at the climax, the threat of apocalypse, with the potential for salvation via faith and human will. The first sequence in the exhibition takes the Tagore painting as a point of departure. Sahej Rahal's Tandav is a documentation of a performance based on a retro-futuristic avatar wielding a lightsaber of neon tube lights. Fahad Barki's iconographic works on paper are presented as a trinity with the abstract ray form titled Saint at its center. Rohini Devashar's Helio Blue reimagines the cyanometer, an 18th century invention for measuring the blueness of the sky. Night skies were etched into the inkiness of folded paper by Hajra Wahid, then transferred to foil to form sculptural maps of the stars. Similarly unfolded, Neha Choksi's Skyfold picked up the infinite variations of sky blue. Based on a photograph of the landing of space debris from decaying spacecraft, Pressure Sphere, recovered in South Africa, stages a confrontation between an essentialized human and a fossil from the future. Sharing the restraint evident in these precise works, Otherland by Ali Kazim is a quiet painting of a crater. Rift by Himali Soin Singh is a terracotta cast of a 3D model based on data made available by NASA, a scale model of the asteroid Eros, named for the god of love. Its two halves were placed at an awkward distance, creating a sense of estrangement. Mehreen Murtaza approached the scattered legacy of the theoretical physicist Dr. Abdus Salam. Comet Bennett over Humayun's tomb is based on an archival image of a comet streaking over the finial of an Islamicate dome. Sanjeeva Kumara produced the Dots portfolio while on residency in Amsterdam, explained as the tears of a sojourner feeling disoriented, looking for familiar forms within a strange new environment. Shishir Bhattacharji's Come and See the Game is a large monochromatic diptych, a sardonic take on the preoccupations of modern life. Hybrid monsters appeared, menacing in a nightmarish scene. In David Aylesworth's series of metal sculptures, Probe's Intervention, made in response to the nuclear escalation between India and Pakistan. They appeared in the city like aliens, heralding the arrival of a new military-industrial age. They reappear in Mariam Sohail's untitled documentation of a performance. A curious group of figures in chemical protection suits appeared at the new National Museum of Art in Islamabad, uncertainly approaching strange and dangerous new forms. Saskia Pantalon, based in Sri Lanka, makes collaged accordion books alongside her painting practice. Drawn portraits are obscured and transformed into freakish cyborgs and aliens, culling from the relentless image production that accompanies technological advancement and voracious consumption. The residents of Rani Ahmad's imaginative universe traveled through space and time, sending us occasional signals. Combining classic sci-fi memes with myth and folklore, he creates what he calls a parallel Earth. Amir Habib's beguiling light sculptures play with the popular imagery associated with ideas of heaven and hell. Lush valleys and exploding clouds layered with fine-colored LED drawings. These are shrines to more sinister, worldly beliefs. Iftikhar and Elizabeth Dadi's magic carpet too creates a perception of sensorial travel. Installed in the dark, it is intended to evoke a psychedelic hallucinatory encounter. The work is inspired by modernist architecture, complex Mukarnas and Giri architectural designs. Op artists Victor Vassarelli and Bridget Riley, the color schemes of modern mass-manufactured prayer rugs and carpets in Las Vegas intended to keep gamblers awake and immersed in their ventures beyond the constraints of clock time. Zoya Siddiqui and Janet Atmini built on a collaborative performance that they began in Sri Lanka, based on the LED halos that adorn popular shrines. Through a meditative performance, they pushed at the boundaries between the human and the venerated, the sacred and the spectacular. I-1 is a film installation by Zihan Karim, a 360-degree view projected onto a large convex surface, a giant eye. The film begins with bucolic scenes of nature gradually beginning to gray into a charred landscape. It may hint towards an omnipotent, all-seeing witness to environmental destruction, or simply point to the inevitability of decay and the cycle of life. In Feroz Mahmood's Flights of the Desire for Castles in the Air, a figment is not far that will be very near. These are collaborative portraits. Together, artists and subjects construct eyeglasses, here from Garment Factory Machinery in Bangladesh, painted acid green. The results are absurd yet hopeful as the subjects, like cyborgs, pose with their eyes directed towards the sky. Ravaged and despoiled landscapes also feature in Tejal Shah's work, Landfill Dance, Channel 2, and her print Between the Waves Inner. Both are related to a wider investigation into identity, sexuality, agency, the body, and its relationship to the world. In this sequence, costume dancers performed choreographed movements through a landfill, robotic, insect-like, never quite human. Sahej Rahal's Rakh Chandra echoes the moon in Tejal Shah's work, which is a Ganesh statue that softly moves. Marzia Farhana's Connecting to Infinity is a video installation with two screens, each with an unchanging image. One is of an orb suspended in a red sky, and the other of an empty gray landscape with the flat line of the horizon. A dual vision that heralds the possibility of an apocalyptic end, or perhaps a clean slate in preparation for a new dawn. I just wanted to end the presentation with slides. We had 138,000 people that came through the Dhaka Art Summit. I hope some of them will have seen the exhibition. The British Council also had young performance poets who came and responded to the exhibition and performed in front of some of the works, which you saw images of. And I just wanted to end to say that I really missed a trick by not hashtagging all the works, because the exhibition has lived on in social media. We'll end after this with a very short clip from Zihan Karim's video, I. What didn't come through in the presentation was that there was a sound element to the whole exhibition. So all of the videos had sound that sort of spoke to each other. So the chirping of birds in the first room in Rohini's work, this kind of really harmonious melody in Zihan's, and then the sound of these insects in Tejal Shah's, and then the fire of the moon burning. So we'll watch that and then get into discussion.
That was fantastic. If a slightly abrupt ending, you just jolted us up. So what we thought we would do is maybe have, again, a few questions here, and then we'll open it up in case there are some questions in the audience as well. You've done a remarkable job of really highlighting the artists and their work, and really allowing their work to kind of to really show, right? And which is to your credit, because I think that's precisely what a curator is supposed to do. And my job, of course, is to see what you've done and to highlight what you've actually done here. And so I'm going to ask you a question specifically related to your curatorial process. Can you walk us through or talk to us a bit about that sort of curatorial, metaphysical, serendipitous relationship between the various sections, so staring up at the sky, alienation, light blindness, and then prophecy? Like, is there a way you can kind of talk through that? Can we get her mic on, please?
Hello? Okay, there we go. So the clip that we saw, that work really was what set me off on this journey. I went on a research trip to Chittagong, and Zihan is a very young artist who teaches at the university. He had recently graduated. And it was a very strange piece to sort of find, and he was at that point really trying to figure out how to project it, because it's projected onto this orb. And I thought it was really great. And that's, where I discovered that actually science fiction is a really popular genre in Dhaka. And while I was there with the exhibition, there was a book fair on, and there was a headline in the newspaper saying that sci-fi is the top-selling genre at the book fair this year. So there's obviously a sort of zeitgeist thing going on. And I really based the exhibition concept on works. I mean, sorry, there was a lot of art in there, which I felt very self-conscious about when presenting. And even though you think I gave the works enough sort of space, I felt like I was really using the works to create this very narrative exhibition experience. Dhaka, like the art fair, it's a big event. There's many different exhibitions. And having curated the Abraj Prize a few years ago, I had kind of already realized that in order to get people to really stop and pay attention in this type of environment is to create an experience that takes you completely outside of whatever's going on outside. So the journey that you make through these different stages was very staged. And so you start with these sort of pale wall colors reflecting the kind of lighter tones of that painting. The works in that room have these very obvious sort of sky reference. I mean, it was literal in some sense. I also wanted to make a show that was accessible to many different audiences. I had gone to the summit a few years before that and noticed that there's lots of school kids, and I kept thinking I want to make a show that a 12-year-old will want to hang out in, And so even though for those who read the text and kind of followed the story, there was a very tight narrative, you could kind of move through the exhibition and take bits and pieces away from it. I think this idea of alienation also happened quite naturally because I was looking at works by the brief I was given was to make a show of emerging South Asian artists. So of course I had to make it completely intergenerational and put in lots of non-South Asian artists, but they just happen to live in South Asia. And so this idea of foreignness, and it was strange that these ideas of foreignness and alienness emanated from those works. I mean, Sanjeeva's work made at the Rijksacademy was about being foreign in Europe. So again, there were these kind of things that, and some of these works, I went into people's studios and pulled out things that they had made over the last 20 years that they hadn't even shown. So he'd kind of tossed these away, and I pulled them out and thought that they were amazing. So
it's interesting because you begin from that, or like your first initial inspiration comes from that orb, right? That was like super contemporary insofar as, you know, it's someone just coming straight out of school. Or maybe just super young, maybe not contemporaries, you know, but like just super young. And yet what holds it together are the many blues that come out of Tagore's painting, right? And so there's some sort of framing that where we exist somewhere between that student who's just come out and Tagore, and the blueness and the lightness kind of links it all through. Can you talk a bit about how, when you were going through these, like through people's studios and looking at them, how were you imagining those, not just the conversations between the paintings or between the works, but specifically how you located it between the orb and the 1922 Tagore, right?
So when I started working on this show, there were two words I decided not to use. One was God, and the other was secular. Even though the show
God
really... Even though the show was, you know, having conversations with both, really.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to either hit people over the head with it or kind of alienate an audience that would then not kind of experience.
Yeah,
you know, I wanted that to come out of the experience itself.
Yeah.
And so again, that the echoes that as you go through, you go from a very light room to a very darkened space. So day-night, you go through these kind of heavenly works to these really dark works. So heaven and hell.
Right.
So hopefully, you were kind of actually experiencing that in the space.
Right. It's interesting because it's actually a lot of fun to talk to you about this here because we spoke about it prior to the project having been realized, and to actually see it realized and to see sort of the resonances between the conversation we had in London and what we're talking about now. And so now I'm going to push you into the political, right? So God and secular is not being discussed, but God and secular is very much being discussed in Dhaka, right? So how do you find your exhibition in conversation with socio-political environments that are sort of kind of pretty present? Like Dhaka is a very politically active and sometimes volatile space. So how do you find your show in conversation with those?
You know, obviously the subtext was very much there, and I guess most people know that, you know, these have been questions all over South Asia, not just in Dhaka.
Right,
I mean, India at the moment,
absolutely.
I mean, Pakistan always, you know, this is really familiar territory.
Right.
And I think what I was hoping was that this would be a space where those conversations would happen. I fear that I may have been too subtle, you know, that again, because there's so much going on. I mean, at the same time as this exhibition, the exhibition next door, there was work that was removed for political reasons.
Oh,
and that became the kind of political story. Or the other way of looking at it is that I got away with it.
Right.
You know, that I was able to kind of create these or raise these questions without causing sort of, you know, I feel like when you court controversy, you have to be very kind of responsible to it.
Absolutely.
Because there are certain things that block conversations rather than enable them.
Yeah.
And I guess if you really want to talk to people, you have to speak on their terms, in their terms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really well said, in fact. And I think there's a certain finesse one can see in how you've walked that line, right? Where it's clear when you look at the work that both God and secular are there, that the critique of modernity, of enlightenment, of rationality, of all of that is there, and very much part of the discursive framework of what's happening in Dhaka as well. But to be able to do that without getting closed down is brilliant. So well done.
Well, to me, the kind of thing, Abdus Salam, the scientist, the Ahmadi scientist who went into exile from Pakistan, but was our Nobel Prize-winning nuclear scientist, was, J.C. Bose, Abdus Salam. These were my kind of mascots.
Yeah.
And while I was working on this, there's so much research. I had a list of, I think, another 30 or 40 works that I couldn't physically ship to Dhaka. So this became this kind of research node that I think will yield a lot more.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have all those in your mind, right? Because now there's always the future. So with that, I'm going to open that up. I'm going to open it up to the group. Hello, group. Sorry, my back was to all of you. If there are any questions. All right. Oh, sorry. Oh. Murtaza, would you like to?
Well, since nobody else is. I was just wondering whether you could speculate on why this might be a zeitgeist. If you have any ideas. It definitely is a zeitgeist, but if you have any ideas about why.
Well, one of the things that the Emirati writer conversation that you had yesterday, I thought what she said about why she chose to write science fiction was just brilliant. The fact that you can talk about things happening here on Earth, which are accepted in sort of spaces that are becoming more conservative because they're technically not happening in this world. So, there's a kind of subversive potential, perhaps, to science fiction and speculative realism. I guess, and this is not sort of a new trend. I think that there's also a kind of exhaustion with the kind of critiques of modernity in the way that in the way that they happen in theory in the last decade or so. And so I think fiction as possibility just generally seems to be really making a return. I know so many artists working now with literature and poetry. It's amazing. Even in this forum, poetry has been one of the sub-themes, which has been really beautiful. So maybe it's something to do with escape.
Yeah. So I know that there are probably more questions you have, but I'm going to ask that we might speak to Nada after. So please join me in thanking Nada Raza for this fantastic presentation.